Hey, it's Tabuli again, recording from the map room, where my friend Tristan and I talk about Atlas Altera, a creative project where we use a familiar but also wildly different map of the world to tell the story of us, humanity. Today we're going to get into some etymologies for my regional themed map, chorographical depictions, and this is going to help elucidate some of the overarching lore. To follow along at your own pace, look up the map on atlasaltera.com. I hope you enjoy, and do subscribe if you want to stay in the loop.
Hey, we're back in the map room, and today we'll be talking about the way you've divided up your world between the landmasses and the regions.
Yeah, so we're taking a regional geography.
So maybe to start off, tell us first about the landmasses you have in your world, which obviously resemble the real world, but you've named them differently and represented them slightly differently as the way we usually think of continents.
I guess what I wanted to do, I wanted to have a little fun here. The reason I did this was because I was thinking if I got a blank slate, how would I draw the distinctions at a macro level, right, beyond countries? Because the way continents get become things, the way continents become concepts, usually is more pragmatic. It has a historical reasoning for it. Regional geography is about looking at different scales of landmass to compare, and I have different scales myself, but they're a little unconventional. Like, for example, in the English language, we use region, area, quarter, place. We use these words synonymously, but we also, you can ask people, they would also kind of know that there's the scale difference. Okay, so just keep that in mind because the way I use region is very specific here. A region is not a province of a country or like a smaller area of a country. A region is larger than a country. Just keep that in mind for now because I'm using an analytical lens here. Okay, so let's start with the largest one.
Yeah, so with the largest one would be the landmasses.
Yeah, so land masses would be kind of like the way a physical geographer would say there are this many continents in the world or this many land masses in the world, because sometimes physical geographers use them interchangeably,
Yeah.
but they mean the same thing.
Well, like a really straight up example is the connection between Europe, Asia, and Africa, for
Yeah, it's
example.
Afro-Eurasia.
Yeah, they're
A
all connected,
yeah,
so
that's
it'd be
one
one
land
landmass,
mass.
right?
But and they'll also say like the Americas are one landmass, and that's the confusion because sometimes, like let's say in Latin America, they call the Americas a single continent, but in North America and in maybe Western Europe, they see North America as a separate continent, even though there's a connection, and they also see Africa as a separate continent, even though there's an isthmus between these two areas, right? So continent usually is more culturally, it maps onto cultural perspectives more, whereas landmass is usually used in the regional geography definition sense. And usually they go like, okay, it's a large collection of land where any offshore lands that are kind of like by themselves, you can tell that they also belong to this. Like they're close, they're adjacent, or the closest land to them is another large landmass. So they're part of that same thing. That's why Madagascar, even though it's a microcontinent, you can also say it's part of the continent of Africa because its closest large piece of land is Africa.
Right.
So the land masses I have three land masses. I have the Americas, which are called the Geminas. Okay, and Gemini is just a funny way of saying the twins. Gemini. So you could imagine that Spanish explorers and early Europeans who get acquainted with the Caribbean first, they already notice that there's this like thin strip of a land that's separating two bigger land masses, right? Because they were exploring Colombia, they were exploring like Mexico, and they also went across Panama. Or map makers might make the connection, right? Let's say like Vespucci, Amerigo Vespucci. Maybe when he's drawing it, he just goes like, "Oh, they're the twins." Instead of like giving his name to the continents, he instead calls them the Geminis, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one. The other landmass is what most people call the Old World. I use another kind of culturally patronizing term, which is ecumena, which comes from the Greek word okamine or something. Ecumene, or I don't know. Anyways, which means the inhabited world.
Interesting, because in French, écume is that the foam of the waves as they hit the seashore.
Oh, Ecume.
Yeah.
Oh, it might be plausible.
So I mean, when I see that, I see it more as a poetic way.
The reason why I'm saying that could possibly still you can see people connecting those two things is because the Greek term came first, but you can see the French doing that because like foam on the landmass. The reason why I'm saying this is because Alaska is named that way. Alaska is they call Alaska the mainland, but it doesn't literally translate as mainland. It translates to the land which the waves go against. So it's a Aleutian or Aleut word. Anyways, let's go back to content. So Ecumene, inhabited world. This is just what conventionally Greeks referred to the Mediterranean basin. They knew there was Libya, they knew there was Asia, or they knew there was Africa, they knew there was Asia, they knew there was Europe, and they called this like the known world to them, Ecumene. This is our Afro-Eurasia. So this is like undisputable. This landmass is all connected, Ecumene. And like the archipelago, like Nusantara, or like, you know, what we call Indonesia plus Papua and whatever, we also consider this part of that, as well as even Australia, which I call Temeria. That's all part of that because they're quite close. There's just a small, narrow strait separating them. You can easily group them. They're not like oceans apart. What's oceans apart, though, the third landmass is Antarctica. And yeah, so Antarctica would be the third kind of land mass.
And here you called it antipoda.
Yeah, antipoda. Antipoda. Actually, you see, this is the hard thing.
Antipoda.
Antipoda. No, that's not English. And it's antipoda or antipoda. It's antipoda or antipoda. Antipoda or antipoda. Antipoda. I think it would be called antipoda. This is the hard thing with using archaic things to coin words. You don't know how it sounds.
Okay, cool. So you have these three landmasses.
Yeah, three landmasses. But
and I mean,
most people won't refer to landmasses.
Right.
They'll refer to continents.
Mm-hmm. Which brings us to the continent level.
Yeah.
And I mean, before we keep going, it's worth noting that the toponyms you use are very much influenced by the Greco-Latin way of describing geography.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you're rooted in that tradition.
Right. The reason why I'm doing that is like on my website, in the About page, yeah, good point, is that because there's no way of doing what I want to do without using any medium. I had to pick a medium. I had to pick a perspective, and I chose the perspective that I'm part of. And then I was like, okay, but how can we rework that perspective to be a little less patronizing, as in like, you know, naming things after just people's names? I find that really ridiculous. And then two, can we be more analytically consistent? And that's just my personal perspective. Like, I would like a lot of like consistencies, as in like, you know, the stands. That's beautiful to me. To see the world having like shared cultural attributes, having similar. It's like code signals, right? They're like showing you things.
So stan means land in Persian.
Yeah, in Farsi.
In Farsi.
But then Urdu in India. So like you can see the Persian world forming that way, right? Anyway, so yeah, the Greco-Roman tradition was actually quite strong even up to the Middle Ages. So the Venetians were still using outdated names. When you look at the maps that they were doing, they were going to the Red Sea, they were going all the way to Somalia, they were going into like Ethiopia, but they were calling these people by what were the names that were used. They were calling these people names that were used by the Greco-Romans. By the way, Ethiopia kept changing. Ethiopia went from South Sudan to the Horn of Africa. Like people just kept moving it around because they weren't sure where it referred to. So there were like these words like the Macrobians or the Gaetulians, right? All of who have like culturally shifted or have gone extinct, but the toponyms still persist, right? And so, yeah, we're using this tradition, and it's just because I just wanted a lot of ias to show the world that Europeans were steadily in contact with. And when you go out of the ia suffixes, you're then venturing to new geographies, which have new geographic traditions, is what I'm saying. So let's say you go into India and East Asia or Serica. The names are different to show different contact points, different periods of contact, and power relations. So, for example, when the people went to the Americas, also new geographies, new traditions, the Europeans were naming them either with European names, or they were naming them with not a lot of respect. Just like, oh, what's that you're saying? Like, oh, okay, I'm just going to base whatever you're chanting at me as the name of your country. It was a little different for China or India. They were going like to the magistrates. They're going like, hey, what do you call this province? Can you say that slowly for me? I'll transcribe it. The transcription might have not been perfect. It might have been actually ridiculous, but at least they were trying to go like, oh, they refer to this as this, and I'm going to make sure I try to get something like that. Whereas, like, let's say in Spain, like when the Spanish went to like Colombia or whatever, they might have heard someone swear at them, or someone says turn around, like Nutka, for example, where we are. Nutka supposedly comes from the word turn your ship around, and it became a place name. Okay, so that's the lens I'm using.
Yeah. And when we look at the actual continents, it's quite interesting because Europe isn't a continent anymore. It's been relegated to the region level.
Exactly. And it's just because if you put Europe at a continent level, you kind of put it on a pedestal of analysis that it shouldn't deserve, right? It's too small of a land, too small of a population in a continent sense. When you have East Asia, India, and like Southwest Asia, the conventional what we used to think of Asia, and you put them all together.
Yeah.
I just thought it'd be cool if we could kind of like rework the borders a little bit so that we can have analytical comparisons that make more sense. Because if you think of like what we historically thought of as Asia, so like the Middle East, without North Africa, then India and East Asia, these areas are hyper distinct. You can easily see the distinctions at a gut level, but then also population wise, ecologically, they are as distinct as Europe, right? So it'd be just cool to start cutting it that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then you have in your Ecumene landmass, you have 3 continents.
Yeah.
So you have Borealia, Africa, and Gandrasia.
Yeah, Gandrasia. I don't know. I don't know. How
I pronounce it differently than you, because I would go more with the French way of pronouncing it. Right. So it's interesting. Okay, so you have Borealia.
Yeah.
Which is not a continent name we've ever come across.
Yeah, but a lot of times people, like if you look at the historical text, a lot of people were either they sometimes referred to the land of the north, or when they started looking for the southern continent, they also referred to the whole world that they knew as like being a landmass of the north.
So why did you choose that name to describe the continent, which is essentially Eurasia?
So it's a little bit of a cliche, but I just thought this would probably be the most likely term for people in the Greco-Roman world if they already knew about Africa. They knew Africa extended. They didn't know how far it extended, but they knew it extended south. And so they could easily see themselves as being separated by the sea and therefore north of Africa, right? So Borealia is like quite of a boring thing, so I don't think we need to talk too much about it. I think most people will say like that makes sense. And of course, again, like these are not endonyms. These are the Greco-Roman terms for the world. And
so the word Africa is a Greco-Roman term.
Yeah, it's a Greco-Roman term, but it's from Ifriqiya. It's either a Berber word, apparently to do with caves, Ifir or something, or like the Punic word or Phoenician word afar, which means dust, which actually kind of is funny because like just like basing this off of what I know, but like the Afar region is very dry. It's one of the driest places. I wonder if there's a connection there.
Yeah, from the Mediterranean going south, you cross
the Sahara.
The Sahara from a region of which is quite green.
Yeah. So I mean, all those hypotheses work, but yeah, Africa remains unchanged. And actually, the whole way we distinguish Africa is unchanged, right? We know there's a North Africa, a South Africa, East Africa. I just named what North Africa is separately. I was like, okay, North Africa is a region. Let's call it something else. So I called it Libya. But we'll go back to the...
Yeah, so let's first cover the continents, and then we can cover the region.
Yeah, so okay, Africa remains unchanged.
What about Gandrasia?
Yeah,
what is that?
Now that's cool. Okay, so Gandrasia, it comes from the word Gandarasa, which is, I guess, Sanskrit for perfumes and spices. That's what I got. Like I used the Sanskrit dictionary, and again, I hope I didn't make enough mistakes that will warrant me to have to change all the toponyms I have for Southeast Asia.
But if someone does point it out, that would be amazing.
It would be amazing, but then I would be super screwed because there's so many toponyms at the country level that use Sanskrit.
Yeah.
The cool thing is like Sanskrit has is an archaic language, and then if you add 2,000 years, you can see how the toponyms would erode and change. So I think I have that as a defense mechanism. But anyway, yeah, land of spices and perfumes. God, that's a great name for what have historically been seen as the land of spices, right? The East Indies, like Spice Islands,
sandalwood.
Yeah, sandalwood, nutmeg, cinnamon, mace, cloves. Especially nutmeg and cloves. These have been historically known even to the Indians as completely derived from just like this one part in the far east of this Nusantara archipelago, right? And in ancient times, the spice without end was making its way into India, to China, and also into Europe. Like the Indians knew that there was a spice coming from these islands. They always knew, and the middlemen might have changed from like Hindu merchants to Arab merchants or whatever over the years, but people were always going to the Banda Islands for cloves and nutmeg, right? The Spice Islands, the Moluccas. They're always going there. So this makes really good sense. And so Gandrasia, just love it. It was like crowning achievement.
I find it really neat that you're able to create a word from a Sanskrit origin and then, Greco-Latinize it to make it more scientific.
Yeah. Well, not scientific, but like Greco-Latinize it to make it more like fit in our Western idea. But then the also thing is like I was able to layer how we think of the world into it, right? I'm using cognitive bias creatively. Right? Cognitive bias is like when you think of one thing and you're like, okay, so then this thing must be that, right? And I'm just finding two things. I'm like a conspiracy theorist. I'm trying to fit two things that shouldn't fit into one. Anyway, so
yeah. So now let's jump to the Americas or the Gemina. So you have for North America you called it Septentria, and South America you called it Crucia.
Yeah.
Can you explain why?
Well, as a Frenchman, you would, or someone who speaks French.
So in French, Septentrion refers to the most northern part of a landmass.
Yeah, and you also know that it comes from like Latin, right? And so the reason why I did this was because first of all, it's very plausible to use this kind of like, you know how like the Greco-Roman, like the Western world, like to use the Greco-Roman terminologies of the past to define new things, right? So it was Australia, Austral. It means south, but like in a Greek word. Greek term. Okay, septentrion. In this case, septentrion historically has meant north, but there's a reason why it's not like cardinal north. Like why it's not nord. Nord, by the way, is Germanic, so it's like it's a carryover of the Germanic Franks. But like the Latins apparently used to have a word for north that was independent of septentrion. It just got conflated. But septentrion used to refer, so it was an epithet. Septentrion was an epithet for north, and it was an epithet in that it literally meant the 7 stars of the Big Dipper. So it used to mean the Big Dipper because the Big Dipper pointed to the North Star, right? So everyone in the north uses that for navigation. So that makes sense for septentrion. You can see the Western, like Spanish or Portuguese, going like, okay, if we had to call this, landmass, because navigation, it was an age of exploration. Navigation makes it's like very important. Okay. So there's a reason why I chose this. Not only is that that it's a culturally and like not hegemonic, but like it would take precedence over other names for North. So it would make sense for the Greco-Romans and then the people who inherited that, so the Western Europeans, to use this word. But it has something to do with stars. Crucia is Crucia and not Meridia. What's the opposite of North in French? Midi. Right? Midi comes from meridion, whatever. But then for sure why Crucia makes sense then, because the Southern Cross is actually in a lot of flags and iconography in the South. Brazil, Australia, they all have the Southern Cross because it was crucial for navigating the Southern Hemisphere when people had to learn, not people, Europeans had to learn how to navigate without the Northern Star. They started using the Southern Cross. So Crucia, it comes from crux or crux, the cross, and so they pair well. They're both star themed, but they also, the Southern Cross is now an epithet for South. So you can see they're both epithets and they're all both star themed, and they North and South.
Cool.
So it's pretty.
And it makes sense because it also links to the Gemina twins.
Yeah.
Cool. And then I guess your last continent is Antarctica.
So Antipodes divided as cis Antarctica and Antarctica. This one makes the least amount of sense. But there's a bit of a lore behind this, which is that Europeans wanted to distinguish themselves from the others, the dark-skinned others, and this is a period of like stuff that has a lot of conflict, and which I don't condone, obviously, but you can obviously see this in real-world history where like people in Australia, in South Africa, thinking of themselves as separate, distinct. Not needing to be grouped with others. Like, for example, Australia population is so insignificant. Oceania is so insignificant, but they're like, we are not with Indonesia. We are our own thing. Like, you could see that, like, people who are, like, on islands that are hanging off of the main continent, they would go, like, okay, we should be the Southern Ocean people. Like, we should be our own thing. Like, we have our own interests. Anyway, so there's, like, a bit of a lore behind that, but you can also see from a physical geography standpoint, it kind of makes sense too, because these are like, except for maybe like the mega Falklands I have, let's say like the Kerguelen landmass here, it's really by itself. It's not close to any of the other continents. And, you know, obviously you don't want to call it just Antarctica, so cis Antarctica, because
Okay, yeah, that makes sense because
Antarctica is uninhabited.
right, because you did increase the size of, you actually really increased the size of some of the land masses, you know, in the northern part of Antarctica. It makes sense to create that. Okay, cool.
And cis just means before, prior to. Midi is south, right?
Not really. South is sud.
No, but Midi is south too. Like Gare de Midi, du Midi. They say that in French.
Midi is more like midpoint.
Midi is south, dude.
I mean, I think historically speaking,
Le Midi.
Yeah, Midi Pyrénées is the region where I'm from.
I mean, South Pyrenees.
Well, no, it's North Pyrenees. If you look at it geographically speaking, because South Pyrenees would be in Spain.
Okay. No. Midi for the south of France. Okay, so Midi used to mean midday.
Yeah.
And the Romans used midday because that was something to do with the way the sun.
Yeah, méridional is south. Yeah, septentrion, méridional.